Father Ernest Larkin is a Carmelite priest specializing in prayer and spirituality. A former professor of theology at the Catholic University of America, Father Larkin in recent years has concentrated on centering as a style of contemplative living. In doing so, he has developed 3 methods of centering prayer. His explanation of centering and his methods of centering prayer form the heart of this tape series, which was recorded at the St. Francis Retreat Center in San Juan Bautista, California. The title of the retreat was Centering and Centering Prayer in Light of Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. There are 9 instructional presentations in this series. In addition, there are 6 prayer experiences which Father Larkin gave during the retreat. The prayer experiences have been grouped on the last 2 cassettes. Father Larkin begins with an explanation of the difference between centering and centering prayer.
The title of this workshop is Centering and Centering Prayer in the light of St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. You'll notice right off that I make a distinction between centering and centering prayer. And I'd like to try to elucidate that difference in this first talk. Secondly, what I'm going to say is, as best I can assimilate it and present it, the teaching of St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross, but not directly, not as such in this series of presentations. I'm going to try to present their points of view in the context of contemporary thinking and writing about centering prayer. Centering prayer is something of our own time in its formulations. And what I want to do is to try to give the viewpoint and perspective and teaching of these 2 Carmelite saints in this area of centering and centering prayer. So in this first conference, I'd like to try to describe what centering is, to illustrate the difference between centering and centering prayer, and to do so by using the parable of the prodigal son and the elder brother. Point number 1, centering. This word comes from Thomas Merton. And Merton coined the word in order to express his concept of spirituality as moving from our false self, our outside self, into our deeper self, our true self. And that is what he called centering. Actually, it's a synonym for spirituality, and a very good synonym. What does it mean concretely? Well, I have a few suggested descriptions here. I like to think of centering as getting in touch with our whole being, especially our deepest being, which is our spirit, our true center. St. Paul describes us as being composed of body, soul, and spirit. His words at the end of his first letter to the Thessalonians are instructive for us in this context. He says, "May the God of peace make you perfect in holiness. May he preserve you whole and entire, spirit, soul, and body, irreproachable at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ." Well, there you have Paul equating perfection with the pervasive influence of God on all the levels of our life. And so if we're in touch with all the levels of our life, actually we're in touch with God on those levels, because those 3 levels are not hermetically sealed one from the other. Rather, if we're in touch with our whole being, then we're in touch with our spirit, which moves out and orders and directs and guides our entire selves. Let me try to explain these three levels a little bit in terms of a picture, in terms of a diagram, three concentric circles. The inner circle is our spirit, the middle circle is our soul or psyche, and the outer circle is our body. Now, these aren't three different faculties in us. They're rather three levels of functioning. And so our body is ourselves as tangible. Our body represents our material side, and this is the side that allows us to be in touch with the world about us, with one another. This is what makes us historical beings in the world. And it's because we are historical that in many ways we're the product of our past. Our past dominates us. And one of the problems in spirituality and spiritual life is to become free of our past. We can never be totally freed from our past, but we can be freed of the limiting aspects of our past by allowing the Spirit of God to come in and heal us of what is holding us too tightly together or holding us back. The outer level of our body is the level that dominates the lives of most people. It's the level in which we exist as consumers, as people who measure life by what we have. It's the level that creates all kinds of desires in our life, multiple desires, which our brothers in the Far East call our illusions. Well, we deal with all of these desires by building up a strong central level of existence, a strong soul. And the center of our soul, the center of our conscious activity is our ego. Our ego emerges from the matrix of our whole being, especially our bodily being. Our ego emerges and takes charge and rules and controls. The person with the strong ego is the person who controls his or her life and manages life, manages other people often. In the effort to be together and to be in charge. Well, what must happen in our life if we're going to be really in touch with all levels, including our spirit, is that we have to be open not just to the past, to the influences of our history, but open to the future. Open to God, who touches us at that deepest level of our being, where we are truly most ourselves. That deepest level is our true center. And when we talk about centering, we're talking especially about getting in touch with that deepest level. That's the level where we are person. That's the level where we can give our life away, where we can give our life to another human being or to God, where we can allow God to come in and possess us. This is the level of our transcendence, in other words, where we are more than the sum of our parts. Because that emptiness, that void that is our spirit, is something that remains to be filled actually by God. And most of us spend a lot of our life filling that void with our own makeshift gods, our idols. And as a result, we are not in touch with our spirit. We're in touch with all of these pseudo fulfillments of that spiritual part of our being that are all kinds of idols. Our first definition of centering is to be in touch with our whole being, and especially with that deepest reality, our true center, where we allow God to be the God of our life and to have a pervasive influence in our life. Is this important? It's extremely important, because unless we are in touch with our spirit and are enlivened by that life that God wants us to have, that He created us and redeemed us for, unless we are open to that, well, our life is truly petty and narrow and limited. Whereas if we are open to this fullness, what do we have? We have all that our heart yearns for. We have the fruits of the Spirit that Paul describes in the 5th chapter of Galatians. The fruits of the Spirit, which are love and peace and joy, patient endurance, kindness, generosity, faith, mildness, chastity. Aren't these the things that we really yearn for? These marvelous attitudes, marvelous powers that fulfill our deepest yearnings. That's what spirituality is. Spirituality is not living a highly controlled life, doing the right thing at the right time in the right place. It doesn't necessarily exclude moralistic perfection, moral behavior that is good. Certainly it doesn't exclude that. It expects that. It hopes for that. But spirituality is not morality. It's something more. And it will bring with it a full moral life, but it's not limited to that moral perfection of that middle level. Much less is spirituality identified with having things or having the human goals of prestige and importance and many friends and all those temporal goods that mean so much to so many people. Spirituality is having God and all things, not just having all good things. If we have all good things and not God, we don't have the truth. We don't have the Spirit of God. This is why St. John of the Cross, in his picture of the Mount of Perfection, the Mount of Carmel, describes two roads that don't go anywhere. One is the road of temporal goods, the other is the road of spiritual goods, and they both meander at the base of the mountain. And he says, the more I desired these things, the less I achieved them. Whereas the one road that goes up the middle and is called the road of nothing, 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 John says 6 times, making sure you know the name of that street. That's the road that leads to fullness. Because if you possess God, you do repossess all things in their proper order. So that's what centering is in one definition. You see how a second description of centering is well said to be wholeness. And it's wholeness because you are all together. You're in touch with body, soul, and spirit. And therefore, holiness is wholeness in this sense. The opposite of wholeness is fragmentation. And fragmentation means that you are locked in to one of those lesser levels, the level of body in which the pleasure principle dominates. The level of body where the rule is gratification right now, instant gratification. Or you're locked into that middle level of control, where you are finding your fulfillment in having everything highly organized and under your direction. There is a process whereby we move from the dominance of the outer level to the middle level and ultimately to the inner sanctum. Our ego emerges and we bring in a certain amount of control in our life. But what happens in the ordinary development of our life is that ego that learns to control very easily becomes inflated. it becomes far more important than it really is. And it starts taking the role of what the Spirit should be performing in our life. And so the ego takes center stage and judges everything in terms of itself. And what must happen if true growth is to take place, real growth, real development, is that false development of over control, over management must break up and give way to a more gentle relationship between the ego and life itself, the ego and the Spirit, especially the Spirit of God. And when that breakup takes place, there's the experience of alienation. This is Jungian psychology I'm speaking right now, but I think it corresponds very beautifully to the spiritual tradition, especially the Carmelite tradition, where you have a certain configuration established in your life and that works for a while, but then it must break up in favor of something better. And so you have the evil of inflation undermining an initially good development and then giving way to alienation and giving rise to a new synthesis. And then that new synthesis goes through that same pattern of inflation and alienation. Well, the whole process is a life process, isn't it? A process toward greater wholeness, greater integration, and therefore greater centering. Well, let me just speak one final word that is a little more concrete, maybe. The process of centering means that we move out of places in our life where we're locked into a part of life, like a fear or a jealousy or a tremendous need we have to dominate or to please other people or to have a certain goal, like a certain job or a certain amount of money. We move out of those places where we are possessed into the freedom of the children of God. That's what centering means. Another way of looking at it is that every major part of our personality is touched by us and possessed by us. You know, we haven't failed to make part of our life our sexuality, for example, or our anger, or our darkness, or any of the polarities that we have in our life. For every reality we have in our life, there's an opposite pole that we have had to put in the shadow. And the person who is centered is a person who is, at least in the process, of bringing as much of the shadow side, the repressed side of life into consciousness. You know, our psyche is like a balloon, and if you don't allow the balloon to have its full presence, if you squeeze it at one part, it protrudes in another part. And that's what happens when we don't accept every aspect of our being. We repress our anger, don't allow ourselves to acknowledge that we have it, don't give it any kind of expression, legitimate expression, of course, appropriate expression. We do that and we are affected adversely elsewhere in our life. Our anger comes out in some sort of bizarre way. Might come out in terms of having a physical illness or a psychological impasse. We're simply unable to take hold of life because our anger is just lying dormant there, buried in the layers of our unconscious. So I think from what I've said, centering is a very broad concept, isn't it? And it has to do with our total growth as human beings. It's a developmental thing. And Teresa of Avila has described this centering process in terms of growth in prayer. Others have described the same centering process in terms of growth in human interpersonal relationships. A man like Erik Erikson, a pioneer in the field of developmental psychology, has described the continued growth in human centering in terms of the relationships and the kinds of interpersonal experiences we have as we move through different passages of life. Those two authors, Teresa and Erikson, seem on the face of it to be miles apart, to be talking about entirely different things. But the fact is, the more you study both of these exponents of human nature, these describers of what happens in fully developing human beings, you'll find that they agree very, very much. There's a lot of convergence there. I'd like to try to illustrate what we've been saying now in terms of this story of the prodigal son. And I'd like to read it, and as I read it, I'd like you to try to identify, in terms of what I've just been saying, these two characters. Which of them is centered? Is either of them centered? Is there anyone in this story centered? What's the condition of the prodigal son when he decides to go back to his father? Is he moving toward being centered? I'd like you to just ask those questions in an analytic way as we proceed through the story. This is from Luke chapter 15. A man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate that is coming to me." So the father divided up the property. Some days later, this younger son collected all his belongings and went off to a distant land where he squandered his money on dissolute living. After he had spent everything, a great famine broke out in that country, and he was in dire need. So he attached himself to one of the propertied class of the place, who sent him to his farm to take care of the pigs. He longed to fill his belly with the husks that were fodder for the pigs, but no one made a move to give him anything. Coming to his senses at last, he said, "How many hired hands at my father's place have more than enough to eat, while here I am starving? I will break away and return to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.'" With that, he set off for his father's house. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was deeply moved. He ran out to meet him, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against God and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son." The father said to his servants, "Quick, bring out the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. Take the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found." Then the celebration began. Meanwhile, the elder son was out on the land. As he neared the house on his way home, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked him the reason for the dancing and the music. The servant answered, "Your brother is home, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has him back in good health." The son grew angry at this and would not go in. But his father came out and begged him to come in. He said to his father in reply, For years now I have slaved for you. I never disobeyed one of your orders, yet you never gave me so much as a kid goat to celebrate with my friends. Then when this son of yours returns, after having gone through your property with loose women, you kill the fatted calf for him.
For the continuation of this presentation, please turn this cassette over. It is not necessary to fast forward or rewind the tape.